All right. Hello, hello, hello. Starting my new game today. Although this is mainly just a brainstorming session. Try and work through some of my design and just kind of the flow that I'm going to take on this design. Or on this game, I mean. Just kind of going through and creating some documents. So I'm going to just call this game description maybe for now. I can always rename any of this. This is a tool that I bought a while back. It's actually made for writing books or similar, but it works pretty good to kind of create documents and then kind of group them into different sections. I kind of like to use it this way. Not quite as the developers intended for this product, but it works good for my case. So let's see, I'm going to create like what should we call this? Maybe just like tech description. I don't even know yet. Game description, tech description. Let's make like a game flow document just to kind of think through the game flow process. What else? That might be a good start, and we can add stuff as we go. So I do kind of have some thoughts already written down on this. So we're going to just call this project unknown for now. We can rename this. It'll be a party-based RPG. Let's say with strategy, city. Let's not call it city. Let's call it base management. So it's going to have, will be a lot of RNG elements so that the game will be random and fresh each play session. Let's call it session because I want to, since this is an RPG, I definitely want to build this out and have it where you can continually grow your team. Wonder why that, just my OCD happening here, but I don't know why that indented like that. I guess it's just auto indenting. Why can't I get rid of it? What the heck do I have set up here that's causing that? Oh well, no big deal. I can work with the formatting later. All right, let's see. So I kind of want to put you will start with a, well, this is more of the game flow. So let me put more of my description elements in here, and then I can switch over to game flow a little bit. But so there's going to be random enemies, random items. Let me change that. Not random enemies, not just random enemies, but let's say randomly generated enemies. I think a good way to put this is think Diablo. So there's a lot of base enemy types. Base enemy type with modifiers. to affect how the enemy will interact with the party. I think that's a good way to explain that. And the items are similar as well. So think Diablo here as well. You'll have a base item with modifiers giving you near infinite possibilities on builds and customization with itemization. And random dungeon generation. Each level in the dungeon will be randomly generated on entry, creating nodes, and then in parentheses I'm going to put rooms. Each node can have events trigger random encounters, what else? I guess I'm just gonna call this out separately, or boss fight. One main boss per level, maybe, and just put maybe additional bosses question mark when you get deeper in the dungeon. Each node can have events trigger, or random encounters, or boss fights. I mean, event can kind of be broken down into several different things as well. Let's see. So random dungeon generation. I think that's a good way to put it. So it's mainly going to be a group of rooms with hallways in between. And then when you go to those rooms, do you have to be in a room to trigger some of this? We'll see how the game works when we get to that point. I don't know if hallways are just like linking objects and not really anything that we'll utilize or not yet. I guess I should call that out as well up here close to the top. So I'm going to say 2D top-down RPG style with a hero leader showing party movement through the dungeon and allow for interaction with objects in the dungeon. Put rogue light or whatever they call this these days. Roguelite play style with infinitely deep dungeon and players will strive to get stronger and deeper in the dungeon as they build out, or as they grow. That sounds better. What other notes did I have off to the side here already? Need to adjust a few things here. Let's see. Let's put this over here somewhere. Put this there. Let's see. So let's kind of call out combat style similar to other turn-based JRPGs with a combat with a switch to a combat scene. Players showing on one side, enemies on the other. I'm gonna put turns are semi real time. I don't even know if that's a word. Let's say are real time in the sense that it will auto fight based on some basic AI that can be configured, but will allow the player to interact and trigger actions, spells, skills, etc. So, like if the combat starts, it's technically just gonna auto run, and your characters and the enemies are gonna attack each other back and forth automatically. And then if you want to trigger abilities and stuff, I think most of that's going to be controlled by the player clicking action buttons and similar. So I think that's how I want that to be for now. We'll play with that when we get that far. All right, what else do I have noted here? Guess I'm going to call this out up here on the roguelike. Say the goal is to get as far as possible before wiping. All right. Maybe just call out a few things here that I called out. So reviving is possible, but expensive. It will not be worth reviving low-level characters. Your player, let's not say party, your player has control of the base and all heroes and must manage their, what I should say here. Let's say cost. Manage their cost wisely, or they may go broke and cause the base to fail, and therefore Game over, I guess is the way to put that. So I mean the end, what causes the game over, I guess, is something good to call out. So game over is caused when a player runs out of funds there's probably multiple ways. When a player runs out of funds, or all heroes die. There might be other things. Let's just put XXX there just to kind of grab that as something I might need to build out better. All right, let's see what else did I have. I'm going to switch over to the game flow document and just kind of start building out the thought process of how the game will flow. And then I'll jump back and forth as I think of other things to add to that game design. This will be messy originally, and then I'm just going to kind of go through and clean it up and make it more readable. So when I come back and look at this in the future, I'm not just looking through all these different notes just scrambled on here. All right, so player creates a new, or I'll say clicks new game and creates their initial party. There will be a few options based on difficulty and gameplay options that decide on how big that initial party is. A harder game may start with less heroes and less money. I don't know what money will be called, probably just gold, but why does it say that's not a word? Based on difficulty and gameplay options, decide how big that initial party is. A harder game may start with less heroes and less money. Player can select a base class for each hero initially. They will start with base stats based on that class. That's too many times I've said base. They will start with stats based on that class. Players will then be taken. This should be a new line, I guess. Player will then be taken. Let's put one more line in here. Player can define their base name. Players can define their base name and what else? Let's just say base name and other defining options. Then start. Then be taken to the base management screen /UI. This screen will allow player to see all buildings they currently have in their base, what resources they have, and how many are generating. There's a potato base. Right. And ways to click on the various buildings to trigger sub menus related to those buildings. For example, the tavern is where you can recruit new heroes and get new quests. So that will be a unique submenu UI for that build. Take a drink. After that, player will be given a little help at the beginning to understand how to build buildings, getting the initial ones needed to start built. So I'm going to say the inn, tavern, inn and the tavern might be the only two to get started. Let's just say that. I'll probably build this out a lot better once I get further in, but right now I just want to try to get all the systems in place and then we can build upon these ideas later on. All right. There will then click tavern. Yeah, see, I think up here what I want to do, maybe instead of giving them an initial party, give them an initial hero / leader. And maybe that will somehow also be tied to the game over idea. We'll see. We'll see if we need to have a specific hero. Let's just call this leader. Maybe this isn't even a hero. I think this might not even be a hero. This might be like this entity, like the king that's controlling this kingdom. So when I say base, it's more of like your kingdom. let's say it that way. Their initial leader of their kingdom. And then let's get rid of this because this is going to be more related to, there will be a few options for difficulty that grant a few options for difficulty that will affect heroes available and starting money. All right. That's a little bit better way to make that read, and it makes a little more sense that way. All right. Given a little help at the beginning. Click the tavern, and they can get a mini tutorial again on how to find and recruit heroes, explain how heroes cost money over time. I don't think I've called this time idea out yet, so let me switch back to the game description because this is something I was kind of thinking through as well. Just to throw in up here somewhere. So I have this idea of a how do I call this out? Call it time slots. Idea of a resource that is used up as the player. Is it a player or is it a hero that's using time slots? Idea of a resource that is used up as the player. I think it's the player. As the player does actions in the game. An example is you might have 20 time. I don't even know what I would call resource. Building a tavern might use up 5 of that. Sending a party into the dungeon might use another 5. I need to develop that out a little better because that's hard to understand right now. In my mind, I can think of how this might work, but as I start playing with it, I'm sure I'll have to adjust it a little bit. Let's switch back to the game flow again. I just wanted to make sure I noted that there's going to be a resource tied to time that's going to kind of affect how the game flows. See how the inventory. Explain how heroes cost money over time. As time resources are spent, what should it be called? Salary or something? Or recruitment costs are incurred. Something like that. Player, I'll just put now that the player has a starting group. It'll probably be between 1 to 4 heroes. Maybe even less than that for this start. Say 1 to 2 heroes. Let's just do 1 hero to start. We need to teach them different pieces at a time. So we'll do 1 hero. We'll have, I think I kind of want, how do we explain this? So let's go back to the other document again. Dungeons are not all connected. For example, it will not be like dungeon level 1 down to XXX. It will be areas that the player can go. Each area will have a level range and multiple levels. In parentheses, I'm going to put not necessarily down. So you could have the beginner, what did I do? Beginner planes that has 3 areas around levels 1 to 5. Each level having a boss, the last area having the main boss. Once an area is completed, it will unlock other areas. So not everything's going to be locked this way, but some areas will for sure be locked this way. I guess I can put that. Not all areas will be locked, but in general, this is how it will work. Okay, I think that's good. Come back to the game flow. Document. So now that the player has a starting group, 1 hero, they will be shown how to head to the first area to explore and fight. Explore and fight. Fight and grow. This will switch to a new, what would we call this? Maybe overworld UI screen, where the player can control movement in 4 directions on a randomly generated map. They can find events, or I could also put randomly generated events, treasures, monsters, and once found, the boss for the level. Alright. If the player interacts with an enemy unit, it will trigger switch to the combat scene. Small tutorial for this the first time. You go through how combat works automatically, but can be affected by clicking action buttons to trigger spells, skills. Combat is over. Loot should be randomly generated and automatically given to, I can't type, given to the party. Now, let's see. Even though I'm saying party, really what I should say is given to the player. And then in parentheses, I'm going to put all loot will be tied to a general storage space. Unless it's equipped to a player, all the rest of the loot should just go in a general storage. And maybe I will kind of build that as well, where they will only start with a dozen spaces or something, and it could be grown by doing additional stuff in the base. So, like, you would have to build a warehouse, and that warehouse building would cost so much maintenance cost over time. But by building it, you would have additional storage space so you could store more items when you go on these adventures or whatever. That's my thought process on this whole sim side of the game is you're going to have to manage the money you're making with your party. So when you hit these first few levels, you're not going to be making much level on each run through the dungeon. So you can't really, you don't want to overbuild in your town because all of the buildings and everything's going to cost maintenance. There's probably going to be some ways to generate a little bit of income in the towns, but I don't want to make it to the point where you can just play the town and not grow your heroes. So that I'm going to have to think through how to make that work. Maybe there'll be like unlocks on some of these buildings where the maintenance costs will go down so that once you've gotten far enough along, certain buildings will be almost free or something. We'll see how that works out. I kind of want this whole idea of the management side of things. I want it to be fun where it's kind of punishing if you just start clicking and buying buildings left and right. There needs to be there you need to be punished for doing that, I guess is the right word. And that can cause you to lose the game if you run out of all your funds. So let's say you really only need 3 or 4 buildings. You end up building 10 buildings with all the money because you had a whole lot of money saved up. But your characters are only strong enough to run through the 4th or 5th level, let's say. And that's just not enough funds to fund all of those buildings, and so you end up running out of money. So that'll kind of be a neat little, I don't know, say mini game or what you want to call it, but it's a neat little piece of the game is managing your funds like that. All right, so back to the flow here. So when combat's over, loot should be randomly generated and automatically given to the player. All right, that's good. Players will continue to explore until I should just maybe say solve any puzzles or battles involved in getting to the end of the level and fighting the boss. Once the players fight and win against the boss, they have the option to continue exploring or to end the level, which will return them to the base management UI, or screen, I should say, management screen. So this is going to be like this whole idea of a cycle, of a game flow cycle. So you're going to start off in the city. You're going to do like a little bit of management to grow your city and to grow your heroes. There's going to be buildings in the city that are going to grow your heroes in some way. Like you'll be able to build a shop. That shop will allow you to buy items to upgrade the equipment that your heroes are using. Or you could buy a blacksmith something like that, like a blacksmith to upgrade the weapons. Um, and then, so that's part of the game flow. That's the first part. You're kind of building that out. And then you go into the, I don't know what it would be called, like a travel screen where you're going to pick which area you want to send the party to. And you can probably adjust your parties each time when you're back at your base. So let's say you have a group of 4 guys that you're using, but you're wanting to switch to a different area that it's more useful to have like another magic user or something. You could ease there. I want to make it where you can easily kind of switch and have a pool of heroes, not always the exact same ones in your group. You're going to have to, I want to make it where you're going to have to build out more than that initial party of heroes to make this work out. And I'll have to think through that too a little bit more. Yeah, so I don't know what, I just lost my train of thought. um, yeah, so we're going to send, that'll be part of the game flow, and then you send them to these regions. That part of the game is, I would say, the most similar to other RPGs like Final Fantasy or whatever, where you're exploring a dungeon. It's going to be different every time, so it's not like you can just fast track from the beginning and know exactly where to go. The boss could be on the right side of the map, he could be on the bottom of the map, he could be right in the middle of the map. I want to make it where it kind of the logic only connects and make sure all the rooms are connected, but it connects them in a way that it's like a maze. That's my hope, is I can create some logic that does that fairly well. And I want to even create some additional, so like I was saying, as they get deeper in some of these levels, it'd be nice to make like mini bosses on some of these levels. If you're in a harder area, maybe you have to get through a mini boss to get to the section that even has the main boss. And I haven't called this out in my game flow yet, but one thing I want to do too is once you enter an area, there needs to be some kind of penalty if you don't finish that area. It might not necessarily be game over, but if you leave an area without completing it, maybe you lose a little bit of experience. Maybe you lose just all the experience and gold you earned on that, or at least most of it or something. I need to think through. I don't want to be so punishing that it's not fun, but I think it'd be fun in a way to have that penalty when you can't succeed. It makes the game more challenging. So the players are going to go through that area, finish out the boss, and it's kind of like that's the cycle right there. Once they finish that level, then they go back to the town. They turn in any quests they had for that level. They have more gold and stuff. They can sell items they found in the dungeon to build their funds up. They can build a few new building upgrades or whatever, upgrade the heroes, switch out a few heroes, and then boom, you go to the cycle again. You pick another new area to go to. And I haven't decided. I think, although all of this is randomly generated, I'm wondering if it would still be good to have, put this in the game description just as a note so I don't forget it. I don't know. So even though the game is a lot of RNG, should there be a static single player? I don't know why I'm saying single player. Just say a single static campaign that the player can work through and have a way to beat the game. I kind of like that idea. I know when I play games and there's not any ending at all, I feel like, at least in most types of games, I feel like I've lost something when it doesn't have that feature. But then again, after you beat the game, maybe you can continue like in an infinite dungeon endless dungeon type idea where you can keep playing. And this might even add an option to create like expansions or whatever you want to call it later on, where yeah, you have a flag showing how far in the game you've finished, and then if that expansion comes out, then those new sections are sections that that player can go through. So, um, what are you doing, honey?
See if I could print that stuff for me.
My printer's not working. I can't get it to work.
All right.
I tried yesterday for me, and I couldn't get it to work.
I just brought my other one down. I want to see how to convert it back.
Okay. Let's see. So, um, I like that. I think it's going to be good to have some kind of campaign, a built-in campaign. And of course, the levels will still be randomly generated, but there will be static areas per se. So, like how I said in one of my examples, I'm going to have a beginner plains area. That's going to be consistent across every playthrough. There's going to be an area named that, and then there's going to be the big bad castle or whatever. You know what I mean? A lot of these areas will be the same, but as far as what they look like will all be randomly generated, so it won't feel like the same game. And I think I'm going to make it kind of like an. I don't like. One of the things I don't like, and this isn't everybody, but this is something I'm working on. I get to make it like I want, right? So I'm going to say open world that allows the player to adventure out and go to areas they choose. Will not be a. How do I put that? Will not be a linear. That's the right word. Linear path of progression. There might be a few spots, and I think I noted that above, where certain areas will unlock other areas, but I don't want that to be the case for everything for sure. So if a player wants to go to like a no camp at level 5 and it's a level 10 camp, I'm not going to prevent them from doing that. Some players like to have that challenge where they can see, hey, I know I'm under leveled. Let's see if I can still pull this off. I love having that ability in games. I hate when games scale everything to your character's level, and then it just feels, to me, you lose a lot of challenge that you can do with a game like that. Or even some players like to take the time to grind to get a little stronger so certain areas are easier. And I think that's a fair thing to do as well. So I want both of those options available in this game. So I will not, let's put that in here too, will not be scaling enemies based on player. Enemies will be leveled based on the area you are in. If you want to fight an easier area, then you should be allowed to go fight an easier area. And if you want to take that chance and go to crazy hard dungeon at level 1, I'm not going to stop you. You'll probably lose and you'll probably be game over, but I want that. I want players to have those options. I don't want the game to kind of spoon feed them any direction like that. I want them to be able to adventure and find different areas. I'm saying find different areas. I need to think through how that works. So how do they find all these different areas? I don't want just like a big long list of those. Hmm. I'll have to think through that a little bit. Maybe it ties into the idea, so it might still be, let's say, open world UI screen for selecting areas will be controlled by some locked areas. Think null town before you can get to null stronghold or something. So like the stronghold's in the town, you have to beat the town level before you can get there. Some areas. How do I want to do that? I don't want to limit players. But do I want every single thing open besides that? Let's just put, okay, I know how I can maybe manage this. It will be set up where the base is like a center point, and even though you can go further out for the harder areas, they will cost more time and or other resources to travel to. So we'll probably figure out ways to build on this idea with the base. So let's say maybe you'll be able to build a stables, and you'll be able to upgrade your horses or whatever you want to call it, your little stagecoach, so that you can travel farther and use less resources. Otherwise, if you try to travel to a level 50 area at level 1, it will be impossible because you won't have enough time resource to get that far. So the game will, in a way, it'll be a little bit blocked, but I mean, once you get to like level 10, you might be able to get to that level 50 area. Now you're going to use up a lot of resources to do that. But like I said, I don't want to limit people. It might still be possible if they figure out how to beat a challenge like that. So I want to leave that open. But I think that's a good way to probably manage that part of it. And maybe what I'll do is even part of the base management thing might unlock, as you unlock buildings in the base, maybe it'll unlock areas. Yeah, let's write that down as a note, and I think that might be a good way to do it too. Base buildings could unlock additional areas further out. Let's say, for example, building a stables may allow the players to then travel to that next section out and show those additional areas. Yeah, I like that. So we'll still unlock some, we'll probably still have some harder areas in each section that the player can get to give those challenges if they want it. But in a sense, it will still be, that part will still be a little linear where you have to unlock these other buildings and open them up before you can see the further out section. So section 1 might be like level 1 to 10 areas, and then you build this building and all of a sudden you have the level 11 to 20 areas. So stuff like that I think would work out good. And you could probably,
Come on, Jim, sorry.
they can probably go back to Lost my train of thought again. Or I was going to say they can build those buildings earlier on if they want, if they have the resources and open those areas earlier, but it'll affect the rest of their city. Like those buildings take maintenance costs that could end up making them run out of money and lose the game. So, all right, I like that. I think that's going to work out good. So let's make another. I'm just making notes in here right now. A lot of this is going to have to be cleaned up. So I'm going to put. This might even go in this new document called tech description. Maybe I'll start this one. So I'm going to put scenes in game. So each one of these, let's go ahead, since this is a tech description, let's call this out too. I'm going to be using Unity 3D with C# and a few Java backend APIs to manage, how would I call that? Manage access leaderboards, player viewing, etc. So even though it's at least initially, it's going to be mostly a single player game with ways to view other players' stats, I guess is a good way to put it. All right, so the scenes in the game, we've already called out, we'll have like a new game screen or whatever that's called. Game enter game screen. That's fine what I got there. Then we're gonna have a game, create new game screen. Well, that's confusing. So I guess this should just say intro game screen. Title. What do we say title games? And then you can go to a create new game screen. And that's where you're going to generate it. And then you're going to go into the base management screen. There could be like different little modal UIs within these screens, but I'm just from a Unity 3D standpoint, I'm trying to think through the different main scenes we're going to have. Like what each one of these is probably going to look fairly different than the others. This one might actually be able to fit in the new. Yeah, let's just do that. We're going to make that a modal or whatever you want to call it of this screen. Then the base management. Make sure I'm not missing any chat. Double check my here we go. Going to have, so after the base management screen, we mentioned you're going to have a travel world UI screen or world screen. I guess we're not putting UI in any of these. And then we'll have, I'm just going to call it a dungeon screen. I know they're not all dungeons per se. Some of it's just like overworld areas, but that's just the right terminology for this. It's going to be a group of different areas that the player can explore and they need to complete. Travel world screen, dungeon screen, combat scene. Let's get rid of screen. These are all scenes, not screens. Combat. After that, there's probably going to have to be inside of the base part. Well, they're even outside, so there'll have to be a separate scene for party and player management. And then we'll want another scene for options. I think that's a good start. There's probably a few others. But so far, anyways, based on what we've talked about, that's going to cover all of the different pieces. So create a new game. You get sent to the base management where you do some of those basic things. You get your hero. It takes you to the travel world after you've got that set up. You pick your first area. The first area takes you to the dungeon scene, teaches you how to explore. Once you find your first enemy, it sends you to the combat screen. From there, you're going to do some initial tutorial to understand how combat works. Once you win that combat, you'll get your loot, which will just be a sub-menu of that. You'll head back. That'll take you back to the dungeon. Once you finally finish the dungeon, it will then return you to the base. So once the dungeon's complete and you click the button that says you want to complete the dungeon, you go back to the base management with all the resources and stuff that you gained from the dungeon. And there's lots of little there's going to be a lot of little sub menus in this base one. And I don't know if those are all going to be separate scenes. It might be easier to manage them that way, I guess, because I'm thinking there's going to be so many that it might get, that scene itself might get very busy. I mean, I'm thinking off the top of my head at least a dozen different buildings that have different interactions that aren't the same across the board. So you'll have shops. I'm going to have some type of like training grounds where you do some of the leveling up stuff. Probably like a church or whatever you want to call it, where you can go and get stuff healed or revives. The inn will be used to do resting and to maybe do something else. I'm not even sure. The tavern will be for like quests and heroes. Yeah, there's quite a few. I should probably start thinking through those, but I'm just going to put possibility of separate scenes per building type. It might be easier. Some of those are, especially the tavern. I mean, I said it's going to have like a quest and a hero UI, so you'll be able to pick from quests, turn in quests, look through a list of heroes and pick heroes. So there's quite a bit going on just in that one sub menu, where I think if you're doing that on several different things, it's going to get a little complicated. So I think it might make sense to make these all separate scenes, but I don't want to call them all out specifically yet in this tech document. All right. I'm going to jump back to the game flow document. I think we're getting pretty close as far as kind of figuring out the flow here. I think I've went through the entire loop of how the game flow is going to go. A lot of this game description, so check and see if I have any other notes that I'm missing as far as. I guess I'll call, I mean, I do have a couple notes here on what I'm thinking, and at least initially. So in Unity, there's this concept of scriptable objects, is what they're called. And these scriptable objects are a way to kind of create items, maybe heroes, buildings. All of those could probably be scriptable objects. But what I'm going to do, and this is kind of thinking down the road where I might customize this and make it more of a online persistent type game. So I'm going to have like these base scriptable object items. So think, this is similar to, so I mentioned how like I'll have a base item, like a base weapon or something. So like base sword, I'll just say, let's say base longsword, scriptable object. But then the data, I'm going to create a database that will, a database entry that contains the custom parts of that specific item. So we're going to have, so let's just kind of think of an example. So you're going to find a longsword either in a shop or off of an enemy. So it's going to find, it's going to go out and find the scriptable object for the longsword. There will be a scriptable object for the longsword that has base attributes. So each longsword is held by one hand. Each longsword has a base speed, maybe even a base attack, or some just certain stats like that. But then you're going to get randomly generated modifiers. When the item is first found, it's going to randomly generate these and affix them to this specific version of the longsword. So randomly generated modifiers will be added. And then new unique item will be persisted to the database, having its own unique ID and linkage to player, or whatever you want to say there. So that way this is built in a way, even though this game's going to start out single player for sure, this is kind of giving me this stepping stone where this could be built into a multiplayer game at some point. It would contain a way to persist these items. There could be hundreds of players in the game, and as long as these all link to a player ID, they can all be generated and saved separately in the system. So I think this should work good. We'll have to look once we get this far, but that's my thought process on how I'm gonna kind of persist the data, because that's kind of an important thing with an RPG. It's not, those kind of games aren't usually things that you're playing one time and then the game's over. You definitely want this idea of growth, and you can come back multiple play sessions and continue growing. So that just kind of explains how my thought process is on how I'm gonna persist that data and save it. So we'll have a separate external database from Unity that I'm probably going to use. I've done this before, so this isn't too hard um, to do it this way. And I can even use some of these backend APIs. I'll probably have a Java connection to do some of these calls where I'm persisting the data. It may be an easy way to do that. That way I'll have like a better way to call this then. Let's just rename this what it really is going to end up being with a Java backend server. So think of the Unity 3D being the front end client. And the Java will be the backend server. So it'll be like, it'll store all the data on the back end. When the Unity client starts up, it's going to make the calls to pull up the player data. When the player is playing the game, and they, like I said, if they find these items will get generated and saved into the back end. That way it's all kind of, it's going to persist. It'll save the data that way. It'll kind of be an auto save in a way where stuff's probably always going to be saved out there. The location the player's at will probably update that way. All of the dungeons and stuff, when they're generated, all of that data will be saved per player into those databases so that we have that available and it's retained. Now the whole idea of the dungeons though, so like a dungeon, once the player goes in, whether they win or lose a dungeon, once they finish that run, then that dungeon will be technically erased. Every time you start a new dungeon level, it will be regenerated. You can't, I'm not gonna, the way I kind of want to have this set up where it adds a little bit of a challenge is when you go into a level, you need to go from start to finish in that level. You need to either finish it by destroying the boss, or there will be options where you can leave with some type of penalty. So you won't be able to leave and come back and leave and come back. I want to add that as part of the challenge in the game. Will be making each dungeon level kind of its own little mini game where you have to go from start to finish in that area. So I'll have to, I still want that all to persist to the database, because let's say I figure out a way to make this maybe I can work this in where it works on a mobile device and a player's playing and they're only about halfway through the dungeon and they have to quit out and come back later. I want it to store that dungeon as it was generated so that when they come back, all of that level is regenerated. It's going to have some type of game state to tell it what to generate, of course. So it'll say game state in dungeon or whatever. That way it knows which methods to call to generate all of that based on where the player was at. So there will be like there'll be one dungeon entry per player in the database, because once the player completes it or fails it, that dungeon can no longer be returned to in its current generated form, I guess is a good way to put it. So they can still go back to the same level, but when they go back to the same level, it regenerates because it's a randomly generated level. So it'll still have some of the same base stats. So if they're going to a level 10 null stronghold dungeon, it's still going to generate stuff based on that base type of dungeon, but it's not going to look the same, and all of the enemies will be back, and all of the items and events will be random. They're not going to be the same ones that were found the last time through. All right, let's see. Just double checking I'm not missing any chat. Sometimes I get into these thought discussions and not watching. All right. So I have some sections I was starting to build out based on like data objects or data models, objects, just to kind of think through before I don't want to just start creating everything. There'll be a lot of refactor involved if I don't think through this at least a little bit. So I think there's going to be, let's just call out like a hero object that'll contain elements of a single unit in a party. It'll have like equipment, stats, level, class is a good way to kind of explain that. We're going to have items. This will contain item type, like weapon, armor, and base stat plus generated stats. So kind of like I explained up here on this longsword, the scriptable object is the base stats, and then you have these randomly generated modifiers. So I'm going to kind of make this hybrid approach where I'm not really storing, I'm not building the items in scriptable objects. I'm building the base items in the scriptable objects. And then I'm taking it one step further and randomly generating stuff to make each item unique. No item in the game should be exactly the same. I mean, it's possible for that to happen. I'm just saying each item is going to have randomly generated attributes. And it's going to be very similar to all these other games, these loot games like Diablo, Borderlands. All these games use this mechanic, so this is nothing new. I'm not recreating anything here really. I'm not creating something new. I think it's kind of new for JRPG style games, though. You don't really see that kind of stuff too much in those style of games, and I feel like it should be. It could be a neat thing. I feel like so many of those games, you only have a handful of items through the entire game. Like your players in Final Fantasy go through like a dozen weapons in the entire game, and that just, I don't know, that just seems kind of boring to me. And it's always the same items. Like if you're playing a warrior class, you know which items you're probably going to get through the entire game. There's no decision making involved. Once you get to a certain point in the game, you know that you're going to go find the ice sword in the dungeon or whatever, So I don't want that. I want this to be more custom. I want to, based on these randomly generated items that you find, you can maybe decide to just take your build a little bit different direction or something. Items. You're going to have a base object. I'm going to switch this because this is a fantasy type game. I'm going to change this to kingdom object. It will contain other objects. So we're just going to go ahead and throw this down. A building object contains different types of events that can trigger, as well as like a level of the building, cost of the building, maintenance of the building, location of the building in the town. I haven't determined if I'm gonna make like locations of buildings kind of be like a mini game, like some games are. Like if you place a farm next to a irrigation system, it would be stronger. I don't know if I'm going to do that or not. I haven't decided yet if I want to go that far. I almost just want to have the buildings in a list, but then that wouldn't, I mean, I want it to be, I want to add at least some type of graphics to this, so I want it to look like something you can look at and kind of see what they got going on. So I haven't decided yet. Let's put it that way. But then the kingdom object, we're going back to this, will contain building objects. And what else? Let's think. The kingdom object would contain that, and then it'll contain like finances. I don't know how else to put that. No, resources. Resources. Each kingdom has resources. Maybe put heroes here as well. They're going to be tied to a kingdom. Maybe a storage object. Well, that's just a link. Well, I can still put it there. Storage object. That's going to be one of these I create as well. Resources, heroes. All right. We'll go ahead and throw that on there since I just called it out. Storage object will contain inventory of items that the player has. What else? What am I missing here? I know I'm missing a lot right now. So I have dungeon object contain map and event map and locations of events, monsters, bosses, treasures. Will be a player object. Will contain like the player's name, stats, games. Could be more than one, I guess. Player's name, stats, games. That's a good amount of call out. There's probably a few more, but that's. And then monster. Monster object. Actually, above this will be an encounter object. Contains a group of monster objects that a player combat. Contains a base, so this goes back to the item up above. It's going to contain a base item, a base monster type, a scriptable object with generated attributes. So monsters will be just like items in the fact that no single monster will be the same as another. Their hit points will be slightly different. Their damage might be slightly different. I might have like an elite type monster that can be triggered, that can be generated, that will be a stronger version of a monster. And it might, if you fight the stronger version, you would find better loot. All right. Let's call out up here in between item and hero. We're going to call a equipment object group of items that are equipped on a hero. So that kind of links the hero to the items. Is a good way to call that out. So I think some more objects to call out would be related to classes. So class object, job, the hero has, will affect skills and spells available, equipment that can be used, base stats, skill object, skills and spells will be maintained using a base skill plus stats based on level or something similar. I don't think the skills will be generated, randomly generated. No, I don't think so. If two different characters have a level 5 fireball, they should be the same spell. I don't think anything there should be randomly generated on that part. Another thing that I think comes into play, so I'm going to just call it the buff object. It also would be debuffs. Objects that can be added to a hero and affect them in some way. I don't even think that's a good enough call out on how that would work, but if a buff is added to a hero, then it causes them to either be stronger or weaker in some way. There'll be some kind of system set up where it'll have a separate method that can be built out for each different type of those. So you could have like a poison buff, and the on trigger method of the buff object itself would be built out in the poison buff child class to add that effect where it triggers every turn or every time you move on the dungeon or something. we've got a lot of this built out now. It's looking good. Let's see, what else do I have here? What other items would be involved in a this? Just trying to think through all the base data models objects for this game. I mean, there's going to be a lot of smaller ones, but I'm trying to think of all the big ones here. Some of these aren't as big as others, but there's probably going to be, how would we call that out? Monsters, dungeon, items, heroes. I think this is good for now. As I think of stuff, I can always flip back here and add it. But I think that's a lot of the base objects that we're going to have to initially create just to start building out some of these systems. I think I'm going to create. So I have a task list here. Let me look, I even added 3 things already. I guess that's related to, let's create a separate, let's create one called project tasks or game dev tasks. Just to kind of start deciding how I want to start building this out. So I think create Unity 3D project. Let's call that out 2D project. And then I also want to create the Java backend server. And then let's just say create. I think what I'm going to use for this that I've used in some of my other projects and will work good for this is this idea of RPCs, remote procedure calls. Create RPCs to connect the front end Unity 3D project to the Java backend. And then let's also create a base. We're just going to use MySQL for this database to house the data. Let's say to start out, let's just create the hero class first. Hero object, let's say object with a few methods and attributes. Create a table in database for heroes to store those attributes. Create RPC calls to do CRUD operations on the hero objects. So that's kind of the flow to be able to create this first. Once we create this kind of flow where we can create an object, be able to grab it from the back end and pull it out of the database, we're gonna kind of mimic this in all the other ones. So once we figure this out and get it clean and get it working like we want, then we'll go ahead and create the additional base objects. Or maybe I should even put base top tier objects. Not all the little ones yet, but all the ones I just mentioned in that other page. So hero, monster item, dungeon, jobs, skills, buffs. Oh, this is a good one that I didn't call out that I just saw in my notes. So events. So in the dungeon, there can be events and they can be all sorts of different things. One event could be like you find there might be like a character in the dungeon that you can talk to, or there might be like a camp spot that could be an event. Just stuff like that. Let me call that out in the other one. Let's put it up here by the dungeon because it's kind of tied to the dungeon. Event object. Tracks triggerable events in a dungeon node. So think like an NPC. Maybe a chest would be considered an event. Camp spot. That just gives me some freedom to create different things. It could even be like a little puzzle or something that if you figure it out, it might open a door or something. It leaves me a lot of freedom to be able to overlay events on top of the dungeon and create some nifty ideas. All right, so we're going to create all these events. What other things did I call out? Player. Inventory. I don't know what I called it. I don't think I called it inventory. I think I called it storage. I do have one other called out on here called party, and I think that's probably a good one too. Let's add that. Party object, which would be listed, I guess, above here. Party object. Group of hero objects that are together in a adventure. That's a fine way to put it, I guess. This could change. So when you're in the base management UI, probably in the tavern, there'll be a way to go in and change which heroes are in your current party. So maybe you want to be mage heavy in one area that you go to, and then another one, maybe you want to have 2 or 3 additional fighting type characters, warrior type characters. So that's kind of what this is. It'll contain the group of heroes that you're using at the current time. And even if you if you take a member out of the party, this goes back to the whole database persistence idea. I mean, all of this is going to persist in your data, so they'll be stored in your tavern or whatever you want to call it, is kind of where those additional members are that aren't in your group. So when you go back there, you'll have a way to change them back in if you want to. And this will be, again, this is part of the whole base management idea. So when you start off, your tavern might only allow you to have 2 heroes or something. And you'll have to upgrade that tavern to be able to have more heroes. So if you want to have additional heroes, that's part of the idea, is you're going to have to upgrade your tavern and incur additional costs. So that's part of the strategy. All right. Looking good. So I think after I create those base objects, the next logical thing to do would be probably just start building out some of the base flow. So, or at least some of the systems. We don't need to do the exact flow, so it's not like we have to create the new game screen first and create the buttons that take you into the new game. I mean, that's one way you could do this. I'm probably going to just do different systems and then I'll link them all together after I've got kind of all the different systems working here and there. Like I said, these are all going to be on different scenes if you look over here on this. So I'll probably create all of these scenes a little bit differently and work on them separately. So I think the best one to maybe start with and will kind of affect all the rest of these ideas. Maybe I'm going to start with combat and just kind of slowly build out that whole, flesh out that whole idea. And I mean, there'll be several refactors involved in trying to make this work in a way that's fun. But I think the best place to start would be combat because that's what adds a lot of the challenge and a lot of the fun in a JRPG type style combat game. So I think we need to get that part at least started first so we can be thinking about that whole idea through a lot of these other steps. So we're going to put that down next in our task list. We want to create logic or just put create combat scene and start building out logic for how combat flows and works. So in parentheses, I'm going to put need to build out test hero objects and monster objects to make this all work. And I mean, initially, I probably don't even need equipment. I'll just start basic, start with one object on each side, figure out how to do back and forth attacking, then start figuring out how to trigger some additional complexities and stuff. I think after that, I'm going to work on maybe tight. So once I get that working the base way, then I'll work on maybe the equipment part. Work on equipment and items. So build out equipment. Objects. Or I said that wrong. Build out item objects and place them in equipment and make sure they affect hero correctly. And then after that, the next logical thing is to create the, what did I call it? Player and party management UI so I can change equipment in game. Do that. So these will kind of be like hard coded on this first test, this first setup. And then this will kind of allow me to set up that UI and also set up the ability to not have those equipment hard coded. I can change different equipment that way. All right, I think that's the next good step there. Then let's build out, build out the random monster generation logic and multiple monster types. let's put build out random monster generation and counter logic. Multiple monster types and attributes to test with. So I still haven't got any. This is still just going to be like back and forth attacks. There's no, so far, there's no skills or anything like that. So this is still pretty basic, but we're at least getting a lot of these systems. If we do it this way, we're getting a lot of these systems built out. So let's do random monster generation. Let's go ahead and after that, let's build out loot logic would be a good way to put it. Build out loot logic after enemies defeated. Give player, or give, yeah, it's fine. Give player loot that they can then change out on player and party management UI. All right. I'm not going to do this for the entire game, but I think this is good to get all the, this idea is good to kind of help me through these first steps of getting all the base systems generated. It kind of, that whole idea where people get scared when they see this huge project. This is me trying to break this down into bite-sized pieces and make it a little bit more manageable. And I'll have a lot of short-term goals that I can achieve here. Each one of these will be like a goal that I can achieve to feel like I'm making progress on the whole project here. So this is kind of how I've learned I like to work. I just like to do little pieces like this, and it will help me feel that sense of accomplishment. All right, so we're going to build out the loot logic. Let's just put create logic to, I don't know, I don't want to go too far here. What I'm trying to do here is show, I want them to do a fight in this test build, earn this equipment. I'll probably just have this very basic, a few buttons on there that aren't going to stay there, but that way they can click to go to the party management UI and equip different gear. And then there's a button they can, I'm just going to put temporary buttons to, and I probably need to put this up higher. This probably needs to happen after we create this. Yeah, that's where that needs to be. Temporary buttons to trigger the party management UI and trigger another battle. Since I don't have any of that built out yet, I think this is just a quick fix so that I can keep testing this part. All right. So that will allow me to trigger battles and equip different gear after battles. So let's even put, since I'm doing stuff related to items up here, let's do this first. Let's do the loot logic and giving loot after I've created that party management UI so that I can build that out and test it. And then we'll build the random monster generation out a little bit deeper so that we have more monster types and we have that idea of random monsters instead of something static. So at this point we'll have random item. Well, did we actually say generate items? We haven't figured out how to generate items yet. I guess we kind of did up here. Create equipment and items. Build out item objects and place them in equipment. Let's add one more step in here. I think I'm I think I'm making that too big of a step because for the items, we need to create an item generation logic. So a base stat item plus generated stats. So we need to create this whole idea of this first. And then I can do this. Let's put and temp button to generate item. So we'll create a temporary button. When we click it, we'll just create a quick little debug or whatever so that we can see that it's generating an item and it's giving it custom stats. Then we can create the item and equipment objects tied to that. Well, the items will already be created, so let's just put it this way. Create equipment, build out item objects, and place them in equipment, and make sure they affect the hero. So make sure that these are updating the hero's stats. So like as it pertains to combat, if they put armor on, we want to make sure that the armor is actually affecting combat and making them not take as much damage, or however armor will end up working. All right. Then we're building out the loot. We have monsters randomly generated at this point. Let's build the job object next with the ability to level up. Let's do that next. So for example, a warrior level 1, 2, 3 with base stats. We're not doing skills yet because we haven't got that far yet. We're just gonna make sure we can fight enemies, earn experience from those enemies, and level up. That's kind of what this next step's gonna be. And actually add a job to the hero. So the hero originally is just gonna be like a base hero. Now they have an actual job that will affect what stats they have. I guess just say, I don't need to call out level up. I know that's what that means. And then what should be next? Let's start. This part always gets complex for me when I've done it in the past. But I think the next logical step is to add the skills. So we're going to say build the skill object. And I need to call out, just having the skill isn't enough. There needs to be logic. So let's say build skill object and action logic tied to skills. So for example, I can build a fireball object. It'll be of type damage, maybe area damage, let's say. And it does 10 to 20 damage. So that's kind of like the skill object itself. But then the action logic, I need to build out that part. So there needs to be an action class, and it needs to have different types underneath. So this would be like the single, or no, this would be like the area damage action. And then it would pass in the list of targets, and the parameters, or the skill probably is what it would be. It would pass in, if it's an area damage action, then it knows the skill will have the right attributes based on that type of action to do damage to multiple enemies. So stuff like that. I need to think through how to set that all up in a way that works, that's clean, easy to read, and easy to reuse. That's kind of where I've been on this, and it gets complex sometimes. I want this to be very reusable. I don't want to build like a big switch statement with 20 different types. I want to make sure I'm doing this in a clean code way where I'm just passing in this top level action object. It's going to have a trigger method on it, and that trigger method will then trigger whatever that lower inherited, uh, that lower child class has through inheritance and stuff. So, yeah, I think that's the next logical step. Even though I think that's a big step, I think it's hard to break that down too much further than that. I mean, I'm not going to build out all of those different actions. This will just be, to start, it'll be one test object and one test action type tied to that logic. So once I've built the skill object and the action logic, say add skill object to job object. So it'll be, so fireball might be a level 3 mage or whatever. So that's what I mean by that. Skill list. And I don't need to do and, that can just be a little bitty one there. Well, let's see. Add skill object to job object list. And create clickable action button for skills. Update hero management screen with a way to set up which actions are available. I haven't quite decided how I want this either, but I'm thinking in the screen itself, you're going to have your group of heroes that you can see there. If you click or touch on the hero, like I said, combat's always running. They're always fighting back and forth. But if you click on your hero, then below you'll have a section on your UI somewhere at the bottom where you can see the list of actions related to the hero you clicked on. So if you click on a hero that has fireball, one of those buttons down there could be fireball, and then you can click that next. And based on which action you click, I guess it would trigger an additional input needed. I don't know. Like if you cast a heal spell, this is more of a UI design idea here that I'm thinking through, but just need to figure out. So they're going to click the hero. That'll show the group of skills. They click heal. Okay, now we've clicked heal, but how do we... It needs to somehow pop up to let the player know, okay, you have to click one more time to say, who am I healing? Unless it's a heal all spell, it needs to have a target. So maybe I can even show that off to the left. Like it might say selected, and underneath selected, it'll show the hero that you clicked last. And that way, if you're like on a touch screen on mobile, you don't have a pointer, so you don't know who you actually pointed on possibly. So that's a good way to track which player you've actually got selected. And what if you have two mages? You're not going to know which one it is if you don't have some type of UI element pointing that out. I mean, you could also just put like a glow effect on the one you clicked or something as well. But then there should also be some type of target UI box, and in there it'll be blank until you click a target. So as soon as you click the heal spell, does it just pop up that, do you pop up this target box, and that way the player knows, oh, I gotta click one more time to pick a target? I'm trying to think how other games have done this, because again, I don't want to recreate the wheel. If there's a way that this is clean and popular and it actually works good. But the way I have this set up, it's not like the system's waiting on you. It's going to continue running even while you're doing these clicks. It could be like, so I've played games where once you click something on the bottom, let's like a card game. Uh, Hearthstone might be a good example for anyone that's played that because I play that one quite a bit. But once you click a card where it might add something to another card on your board. As soon as you click it, you kind of have this like drag effect where if you click it and drag, it creates an arrow. And then that arrow, you pull it to who you want it to target. And then when you let off, of course, I'm sure the game does logic to make sure that you put it on someone that you're allowed to, but then it triggers the effect after you've done that click and pull. So maybe instead of it being a click on the UI button, it needs to, as soon as you click it, you should see like an arrow pop up that it's got next to it. And if you start dragging, it pulls that arrow out. That could be something. Yeah. I'll have to play with it when I get to that point, I guess. But you can think on some of this stuff for a really long time, and I don't want to get too stuck on in the weeds right now when I'm just trying to think through this initial process and what I need to be working on at each step. So yeah. All right, so I said I want to update the hero management screen with a way to set up which actions are available. And then in the combat scene, create logic that shows the action items available when a hero is clicked. Thanks for the follow. And all right, so once we've got shows the action items when the hero is clicked, and then when we click the action and select any parameters like target, so we don't know exactly how we're going to do that yet, but that's a good way to call this out. Trigger action as needed, or just trigger action. I don't need to put that. Trigger action. I'm going to click the action, select any parameters, trigger the action. So now at this point we have the heroes, we have the monsters. Monsters are getting semi-generated with some custom stats, but they don't have any skills yet. Now we've got it where the hero has a skill that they can click and trigger and cause something to happen based on what the skill we decide to test with is. Probably just trigger with some kind of base attack skill initially just to make sure we can get that working. And then we'll slowly start creating all the different types. So there'll be healing, there'll be area attacks, single attacks, damage over time. I can think of all sorts of different action types that will need to be built out in after a while, but I'm going to start with one or two action types initially, and then I can come back later on after all the systems are built and start fleshing that out better. All right, so we have the actions. Let's go ahead and add logic to monster generation and or the scriptable objects, I should say, that pulls in skills for monsters, I guess is the best way to put that. So I want to make sure that not only do I have it set up where the heroes can use skills, but I want to make sure I have it where monsters that are generated can use skills as well. All right. That's just about That's almost all the base combat stuff there. I guess something I probably should have put up higher. Let's see, where would it be the best at? Let's see. Maybe way up here. After the combat scene, I should probably create a win or lose scenarios that are determined based on your heroes die. A good way to call that out. Because that should have been part of this whole process. I mean, at some point your hero will either win or lose. I haven't really called that out specifically anywhere else, so I think that's the whole combat section. Let's see. Just double checking my notes. Let's see. So after I do that, do I want to do... Let's go ahead, since we're already in here and we'll be kind of already in the right mode, let's add the buff objects next. So this will allow a skill to trigger a buff that does something over time. So it could maybe add to stats, subtract HP every XX seconds, etc. Something like that. So like a damage over time spell is actually going to trigger this buff object, which in that case, of course, it's a debuff. But that's how I'm going to have that set up, I think. And I want to be able to test that as well, because that's going to build out some additional action types and stuff. So we'll do that next. That way we kind of also make sure that's getting added to monsters and or the heroes correctly, and it's adjusting their stats correctly. So at this point we have heroes that have equipment, that have skills, that have jobs. They can level up their jobs. They can cast skills that trigger buffs, either helpful or harmful buffs. We have a way to select the actions and the targets for those skills. All right, I think that's a big part of it. Let's just kind of back up one step then, as far as what I build out. And since the combat is part of the dungeon scene, I mean, that's what triggers combat is in a dungeon scene. Let's go ahead and, after all of this is built out, we'll start working on the dungeon scene. Add dungeon scene. And build out dungeon. I'm just going to put basic dungeon generation logic. I'm sure this is one of the things that'll go through a lot of iterations. And I think this will even have... So this will have like a scriptable dungeon object. Or scriptable object for dungeon. It'll help. It'll manage tile. How do I want to put this? Manage dungeon sizes, like room sizes, event saturation or something like that. Difficulty or level might be a better way to put that. Theme. So I could have like a forest theme, dungeon theme, castle themes. So that'll be, that initial thing will help build out this idea of a map, of a dungeon map. And then we should create create UI tiles and sprites to show based on that dungeon data. So that first step's going to generate data. It's going to create numbers, nodes, and stuff. It's all going to be data that's stored in the database. This next section, like, let me call that out. Just data in the database at this point. Up after that, we want to go ahead and take and create like UI tiles for a path, for a wall, for your character, for monsters, for treasures. All of that needs to be linked sprites and tiles to that dungeon data. So that's what this step means, is create the UI tiles and sprites to show the player based on that dungeon data. That's probably a pretty big step, but not really. Once you figure out the right logic there, there's not a whole lot to looping through like an XY dungeon, a 2D dungeon, I should say, and generating that. So I've done that a little bit in the past on some of my other projects. Really, you just want to generate the initial floors, so the floors and walls, and then you just do a second pass over some type of events, a big group of events. So like your monsters could be events, your boss could be event, any of those little additional NPC, treasure chests, those are all events, and you just loop through that object and place all those on top, and then you can add and remove them as they're destroyed. So that's what I'm thinking on that. All right. So now we have a dungeon and we have a UI. So now we need to create input logic that allows for the player to move and camera update accordingly. That's a good way to put that. All right. Input logic that allows for the player to move and camera update accordingly. Create logic to trigger events when the player comes in contact. And in parentheses, I'll just put encounters, chests, doors, etc. So yeah, now we got a character. They can move around the level. I probably should also put up their current input logic that allows the player to move. Maybe put in parentheses, walls, block movement, etc. Because there's other little things you got to think of when you're making movement like that. Create logic to trigger events when the player comes in contact. Encounters, chests, doors. And then I need to put up here. So this will be like another little temporary UI thing, but I'm going to put on this step temp UI to generate level with player in a starting location. Because that's gonna, I mean, just generating this UI doesn't do us any good if we don't have that one additional step of being able to do it when you start it up. Create logic to trigger the events. So maybe I'll put create loop of combat and then back to dungeon view and make sure data and game state persists correctly. So a way to test this will be I'll be persisting data to the database. I'll have a game state for that player, and I want to know, are they in combat? Are they in the dungeon? If they're in the dungeon, I want to know which tile they're on, and I want to know the state of that dungeon. That's all going to be persisted in the database. So when I push play, I might play a little bit and get to a different location, and then I should be able to stop playing in Unity, which will close that session. And then when I push play again, my code should go and grab all that data, and it should show right back up like it was when I stopped it. So I'm going to make sure I have it set up in that way because I want it to persist. Like I said, I want this to work on a mobile or anything like that. I want to have the persistence ability where you can go in and out of this game and it remains in the same location. All right, so create loop of combat, back to dungeon and back. So kind of go back and forth with combat in the dungeon. And then maybe just create fleshed out example level with a boss and the ability to finish the level. So at this point, once we've done that, we've kind of done this the base at least of the dungeon part. The dungeon has all the combat, all the looting and finding stuff in the dungeon, that's all there. And then once we do this, that next piece will be probably go back to the kingdom. So maybe that should be the next step. Let's go back to our scene view. So this one will be done. This one will be not done, but this one will be created. This one will be created. This one will be created so far. I think the next logical step is to start jumping into this base management. So I think what I'm going to do, let's see. Create base management scene and basic UI elements. And I need to think through this part. Do I want to have like a SimCity-esque UI where you can say, I want to build a warehouse? Do you want to pick an actual spot? Do I want to have it where you pick an actual spot on the map? And I mean, there's some freedom here. Like, how much freedom do I want in this base management sim part of the game? Do I want them to be able to build multiples of the same type of building? And what does that gain the player if they do that? Lots of questions there. Turn my fan on, it's getting hot. So how hard would it be? I can still build out the ability to place the buildings, and that way, that at least as a player, that gives you some creativity and some uniqueness amongst other players. So I want people to be able to see, I want them to be able to click on a player and view their base and view their heroes, like through some type of online interaction. So I think I will build this out. So I'm going to put similar to a dungeon, but not generated. It's going to be based on where players place buildings. We'll keep it that way for now. I don't know if it will affect the base itself yet. I don't know if placing buildings next to other buildings is going to trigger anything. It's nice to have that set up in a way where it could. I don't want to flesh this out right now, but I don't want to make it where I can't do this in the future, I guess is what I'm trying to say. All right, so we're going to create the base management scene in basic UI elements. And then let's just say create a couple building types, a couple buildings, and since I'm building this like as a UI tile map idea, I'm just going to say in tiles to match. Create a drag and drop or something similar. Drag and drop or similar approach to place a new building. And then also put logic to determine if player has resources. And then maybe put create, let's see. Let's say create a resource UI to track resources the kingdom has and show some type of generation as a test. So let's say you build a lumber mill. I want to be able to prove that it's generating lumber over time as the time resources are used up. How do I want that to work? Do I want someone just to trigger a button that says pass time or something like that, or end turn? Or do I want it to be based on real time? I like that on some games, but I also don't like that on some games where you have to like you're playing and you have to wait 10 real life minutes for a building to finish. I don't really like that. I would rather someone be able, it might still kind of work that way where after 10 real life minutes, you get 10 time resources in my game. And then when you log in, you have those 10 available. You can click build, it costs 10 time resources, boom, it should build and be done. I like that much better. And that's why I kind of have this idea of a time resource in a lot of these pieces. It still adds the kind of idea where you might have to do some type of time generation. I still don't know. I don't want to make this where you have to log in 10 times a day. So I need to think through that a little bit as we get to these steps and see how it plays out. If it's not fun, I'm not including it. I don't care if it helps generate real life money. That's not my end goal, is to make this game fun. If it's really fun to players, I can worry about if I ever get this to the point that it's something I would try to sell, that it could make money in whatever way if it's a fun game. So create a resource UI to track resources. All right. So once we've done that, I'm gonna put, just so I don't forget this when I come back to example lumber mill, generating lumber. Um, create UI to click on new building and trigger submenu. So tavern and inn are the first two that I want to build out for that. So I might even, no, that's good. I'll just keep those. That might be a fairly large, not really. Well, let's build that out. Create ability to rest at inn. Create ability to get hero at tavern. I also want the hero, the taverns to have quests, but I'm gonna build that in later on. And I just realized I don't have that as an object in my other. That probably should be considered an object down here. Quest object. So create an ability to get a hero at the tavern. All right, so now we are in the town. We have a way to get more heroes. I'm gonna, instead of get it here, I'm gonna say manage heroes at tavern. So I'm gonna put add, remove. What else? Is that the only two? Add, remove. Maybe one should say fire or something like that. Because even part of the management part of the game that I want is every hero you have is going to cost you some type of money over time. That way you have to earn more money to have more heroes is kind of the idea here. Got those two buildings set up now. Maybe we'll create a shop next to and a shop UI to allow for buying, selling items. Before I do that, this is kind of a big step. So I'm gonna put create shop item generation logic based on players, based on, not on the player, on the shop's level. So if you somehow can get a level 10 shop, then it will generate really good items, but it's going to cost you more money. So you can generate better items. It's not based on your levels, your character levels. It's going to be based on how much you've upgraded the shop. So yeah, the level 1 shop might just have like cloth armor. And the level 5 shop might have chain armor, for example. All right, so we have a shop now. We have heroes. Let's see what else. I don't want to go too deep on any one area until I get all of the systems built out. And then I can just kind of flesh all of these systems out over time. But I want to get all the base systems fairly quickly. so that I kind of have like a complete front to end, front to back system, start to end, whatever the right word is. My goodness, I have a hard time talking. Okay, I'm going to create ability to upgrade buildings and also build out a few buildings with upgrades so that I have buildings that will work that way. So for tavern, add heroes, shops, add better items, and add more healing or whatever I want to call it. So if I start with just those 3 buildings for now, that's good. All right, so now we have the base. I just thought of something. So up here, where do I want to put this at? I don't have to put it up there. It can be down here. So I'm going to say create logic that checks resources, and if they run out, it's game over, question mark, or some other effect. So right now it might just be game over, but maybe I'll think through this and there might be different ways to adjust this. Maybe you'll just be stuck and you can't get anything until you have to go in and like sell a building or something. I don't even know if buildings should be allowed to be sold yet, but just something like that. So we're going to create some logic that will kind of decide if the game gets to a point where you lose. I think that's a good thing to have in this step. And what else do we have here? We have where's the scenes? So that'll build out a very basic form of the base management. But we need the travel. That's what we can build out next. That way we can kind of flesh out more dungeon types and give that effect that it's a much bigger world rather than just keep going to the same dungeon each time. Yeah, this is almost done. So let's create the, what the heck did I call it? Travel world. Oh, I don't know what I just clicked. Create the travel world scene and add a UI that generates based on a list of data the player has access to based on their current I don't even know what I'm going to call. I'm just going to say travel stats because we don't know exactly how that's going to be built out yet. You're going to have some type of, like, you can maybe travel to level 2 once you build a stables, and maybe you can travel to level 3 after you build something else. So, or after you upgrade the stables to level 5 or something. That gives you the ability to travel farther. And then, like I said, since this is kind of like an open world, once you have an entire area open, you can click on any area in there, even if your characters aren't leveled to be able to fight in that area. That's up to the player to decide if they want to try something harder than they probably should. Alright, and then create clickable or create the ability to either click on the kingdom to return to base management or an area to take the current party and enter that dungeon. Remember, I'm using dungeon loosely. It's not necessarily a dungeon, it's just a level that the player can go through with their party. Alright. That screen's pretty basic. There's not much you can do there. It's just going to generate based on which areas you currently have unlocked. You can either click to go back to the base on that screen, or you can click on one of those areas and then you can attempt those areas. Alright. We are getting close. What's the next one? We have an options screen still. And the new game screen. So let's just create, we don't really need an options screen until later on. We can just create the base UI elements, but we don't have to do too much there yet. So let's just say create the starting game scene and allow a player to create a new game, load an old game. So this is going to add a little extra logic that we need to think about in the database. I'm going to call that out. Extra logic should be added. Let's put it in. I don't want to put it here. This is too far down my task list. I want this to happen early on in the Sorry, I'm thinking out loud and I'm not saying what I want to say, but I want the database to make sure when it's tracking a player object that we have this idea of more than one game. So track game ID and player ID. So that means you could have 3 games in your save file, and depending on which one you pick is how it knows which data to load when you load in. So back to the example of a mobile phone user. If they log into the game, maybe it asks them when it first comes up, it might show the games that player currently has that they've been playing. And if they click one, that's when it does the full load, where then it can find the persisted data in the database and the game state and pull that all back up. So I think I called this out good enough and I've thought about it enough that I should be able to make sure I do that step correctly when I get to that point. So we're creating that starting game scene, allow a player to create a new game or load an old game. Old game, view options, quit game. And then let's just say create the basic options screen. Nothing has to be here yet, because I'm not even sure what we're going to have in there yet, and that kind of stuff changes based a lot based on what you've already got in the game and stuff. So all right, I think this is a really good start. This gives us a really fleshed out game plan on the steps I need to take to get the basic game created. And once we get to this step, we have a working game. Now, it's not going to be very neat. There's going to be very basic stuff. But every single system, then we can start fleshing out piece by piece. And really kind of doing the build and test model more at this point. We'll be able to just start doing build and test and flesh it out. And it'll really start to take the form of a game more than just all these different systems that aren't combined completely. Yeah, looks very good. Well, I think I've been going for a little while, so I'm probably going to call this session in a few minutes here. But yeah, we were able to get kind of a little game description document kind of built out a little bit here with kind of how the game works. We thought through a lot of the tech that we're going to use. So like I said, I'm going to use Unity 3D on the front. I'm going to use some Java stuff on the back end, just kind of help me persist the data and generate leaderboards and stuff. I have all the scenes figured out, at least for the base game. We've kind of thought through all of the bigger base objects that are involved in the whole game. We walked through the game flow. So it's kind of a cycle where the players have like the base sim part where they're building their city a little bit. Then they can define their party and head out and run a dungeon. Those dungeons are kind of like single instances where you either win or lose and it regenerates each time. And you'll get loot and experience in those. Then you can head back to the base and kind of rinse and repeat. You can upgrade your characters with the loot and the income, upgrade your base, and the whole idea is to just continually grow and get to the stronger levels and get your characters built up. So, and we've built out a very detailed list, at least of all the basics tasks we're going to have to do to get through all the main systems. This isn't all of them fleshed out by any means because I want to work on getting all of the systems in place before I start fleshing any one thing out too far. Because sometimes if you do game dev like this, you get stuck in one area and start trying to, like I mentioned the actions, like when you run actions, so you have like an attack action and you might have an attack all action and you might have a heal action and you might have a poison debuff. I mean, there are so many different things. If you get stuck in one area trying to flesh it out, you're not gonna, it's gonna take a really long time. So we're building out all the base systems with just 2 or 3 test things for each section. And then we'll come back after we've completed this list, and then we can really start playing with gameplay balance and how to make it more fun. So, all right, I do appreciate anyone that's been watching today. And my plan is to do this hopefully a couple days a week, 3 or 4 hours each time in between my day job and other tasks. So I'm going to try to get a schedule set up that's more concrete, but right now I don't have that. But as I know which days, I'll probably put them at least 1 or 2 days in advance when I'll be able to get on and continue working on the project. So uh, thanks again, guys. I'll talk to you next time.